You're being way too sensitive about this, Brittany. Can't you take a joke? Trevor laughed, his voice carrying across the elegant dining room of Castellanos, one of Charlotte's most expensive restaurants. I sat there, my cheeks burning with embarrassment as other diners turned to look at our table. My boyfriend of 2 years and his best friend Connor had been making snide comments about my career for the past hour. But this latest jab felt like a slap in the face. My name is Brittany Dawson. I'm 32 years old, and I work as a senior marketing coordinator for Crimson Harbor Group, a thriving advertising agency in Charlotte, North Carolina. Just 3 days ago, I received the promotion I had been working toward for 18 months. I was so excited to share the news with Trevor that I suggested we celebrate at the finest restaurant in the city. What I hadn't expected was for him to invite Connor along, and I definitely hadn't expected them to spend the entire evening tearing me down. I mean, seriously, Connor chimed in, cutting into his $40 steak that I was paying for. Marketing coordinator sounds so fancy, but isn't it basically just making flyers and posting on social media? My little sister does that for her high school drama club. He smirked and took another bite, clearly enjoying himself. I felt my stomach drop. This was supposed to be my celebration dinner, a moment to share my joy with the person I thought loved and supported me. Instead, I was watching Trevor nod along with his friend's cruel words, his eyes gleaming with amusement rather than the pride I had hoped to see. Actually, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, my new role involves developing comprehensive marketing strategies for major corporate clients. I'll be managing campaigns worth hundreds of thousands of dollars and leading a team of 12 people. My hands trembled slightly as I reached for my wine glass, a glass of Cabernet Sauvignon that cost more than most people spent on groceries in a week. Trevor rolled his eyes dramatically. Come on, babe. You're not exactly running a Fortune 500 company here. Let's be realistic about what you actually do. The condescension in his voice made my chest tighten with anger and hurt. I looked around the restaurant, taking in the crystal chandeliers, the soft piano music, and the other couples who seemed to be genuinely enjoying each other's company. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was the only one at our table with a real job and actual income. Yet I was the one being treated like my accomplishments meant nothing. Something cold and determined began to settle in my chest as I realized that this evening was showing me exactly where I stood in Trevor's life. I had met Trevor 2 years ago at a coffee shop near my apartment. He was charming, handsome, and had this easy confidence that drew me in immediately. At the time, he told me he was between opportunities, exploring his options after leaving his previous job in sales. What I didn't realize then was that between opportunities would become his permanent state of being. For the past 24 months, Trevor had drifted from one failed venture to another. First, it was his attempt at becoming a personal trainer, which lasted exactly 6 weeks before he decided the gym schedule was too demanding. Then came his brief stint selling insurance, which ended when he couldn't handle the rejection that came with cold calling potential clients. Most recently, he had been trying to launch a podcast about sports commentary, but he hadn't recorded a single episode in 3 months. Meanwhile, I had been steadily climbing the ladder at Crimson Harbor Group. I started as a junior marketing assistant, working late nights and weekends to prove myself. I took on extra projects, learned new software programs on my own time, and slowly built relationships with key clients. My dedication paid off when I was promoted to marketing coordinator last year, and now, finally, I had earned the senior coordinator position that came with a substantial salary increase and real leadership responsibilities. "Remember when you used to help me with my bills?" Trevor said now, stabbing at his asparagus with unnecessary force. "Now you're acting like you're some kind of corporate executive, It's actually pretty funny how seriously you take yourself. Connor nodded enthusiastically. Right? Like, we get it. You have a job. But you don't need to act like you're changing the world with your little marketing campaigns. He gestured vaguely with his fork, a piece of expensive meat dangling from it. I thought about all the times I had covered Trevor's rent when his latest business idea failed to generate income. I thought about the groceries I bought, the utilities I paid, and the countless dinners at nice restaurants where I quietly picked up the check without making him feel bad about it. I had supported his dreams even when they seemed unrealistic, believing that eventually he would find his footing and we would be true partners. You know what the best part is? Trevor continued, warming to his theme. She actually thinks this promotion makes her better than us, like she's too good for normal people now. He looked at Connor with a knowing expression that made my blood run cold. I realized in that moment that Trevor didn't see me as his girlfriend or his partner. He saw me as his meal ticket, someone who would fund his lifestyle while he figured out his next move. The respect and admiration I had hoped for had never existed. In his mind, my success was something to be diminished rather than celebrated, because it highlighted his own failures and lack of direction. The waiter approached our table with a warm smile. How is everything this evening? Can I get you anything else? Actually, Trevor said with a grin, we'll take another bottle of that wine, the expensive one. He didn't even glance at me, just assumed I would continue playing the role of generous provider while accepting his disrespect. The second bottle of wine arrived, a $90 Bordeaux that Trevor had ordered without consulting me. He poured generous glasses for himself and Connor, while barely filling mine, as if I were somehow less deserving of the wine I was paying for. The casual entitlement of the gesture struck me like a physical blow. You know what I think? Connor said, leaning back in his chair with the satisfied air of someone who had enjoyed an expensive meal at someone else's expense. I think Brittany's gotten a little too big for her britches. Success has gone to her head. Trevor laughed loudly, drawing more stares from nearby tables. Oh, absolutely. Remember when she used to be fun? Now everything's about her career this and her clients that. It's exhausting. He took a long sip of wine and shook his head in mock disappointment. I felt something break inside me, a final thread of patience that had been stretched to its limit. Here I was, celebrating what should have been one of the happiest moments of my professional life, and the two people I had chosen to share it with were actively trying to tear me down. The restaurant bill would likely exceed $500 by the time we finished, money that came entirely from my hard work and dedication, yet I was being treated like an inconvenience. I just think, Trevor continued, his voice getting louder and more animated, that someone needs to remind her that at the end of the day, she's still just doing busy work. Making PowerPoint presentations and sending emails isn't exactly brain surgery. He gestured dramatically with his wine glass, nearly knocking over the breadbasket. Connor nodded sagely. Exactly. And the attitude that comes with it? Like, we're trying to have a nice dinner here, and she's sitting there all moody because we're having a little fun with her. If you can't handle a little friendly teasing about your job, maybe you should just go home. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Trevor looked at me expectantly, waiting for me to apologize, to laugh along with their jokes, to shrink back into the supportive role he expected me to play. The restaurant continued to buzz with conversation around us, other couples and families enjoying their evening while unaware of the drama unfolding at our table. I looked at Trevor's face, really looked at it, and saw clearly for the first time who he really was. He wasn't the charming man I had fallen for 2 years ago. He was a man-child who resented my success because it highlighted his own failures. He was someone who felt threatened by my accomplishments rather than proud of them. And most damaging of all, he was someone who would tear me down in public to make himself feel better. "You know what?" I said quietly, setting down my wine glass with deliberate care. "You're absolutely right." I reached for my purse, my movements calm and controlled, despite the storm of emotions raging inside me. "Maybe I should go." Trevor's expression shifted from smug satisfaction to confusion as I stood up from the table. He had expected me to back down, to laugh off their insults, and continue playing the role of the compliant girlfriend who financed their good times. Instead, I calmly opened my purse and pulled out my wallet. "Wait, what are you doing?" Trevor asked, his voice suddenly uncertain. The confident smirk had disappeared from his face, replaced by a flicker of concern. "I'm taking your excellent advice," I replied, my voice steady and clear. "You said if I couldn't handle your friendly teasing, maybe I should go home. So that's exactly what I'm going to do." I placed $30 on the table, enough to cover my glass of wine and a generous tip for our server. The rest of the bill, I realized with grim satisfaction, would be Trevor and Connor's responsibility. The appetizers they had ordered, the expensive steaks, the 2 bottles of wine, the dessert menu they had been eyeing for the past 10 minutes, all of it would be their problem to solve. "Brittany, come on," Trevor said, reaching for my arm. "Don't be dramatic. We were just joking around. You know we don't really mean any of that stuff." I pulled my arm away from his grasp and looked down at him with a calmness that surprised even me. "The thing is, Trevor, I don't think you were joking. I think you meant every word. And I think you've been feeling this way about my career for a long time. Tonight was just the first time you felt comfortable saying it out loud." Connor shifted uncomfortably in his seat, finally realizing that the situation had taken a serious turn. "Hey, maybe we all got a little carried away here. Why don't we just order dessert and call it even?" "Call it even?" I repeated, letting out a short laugh. "You spent the entire evening mocking my career, my ambitions, and my success, and you think we can call it even over dessert? That's not how this works." The waiter appeared at our table, sensing the tension, but maintaining his professional demeanor. "Is everything all right here? Can I get you anything else?" "Actually," I said, turning to him with a smile, "these gentlemen will be handling the check this evening. I was just leaving." Trevor's face went pale. "Brittany, wait. You can't just leave us here. You know I don't have that kind of money right now. My credit card is maxed out from that equipment I bought for the podcast." The admission hung in the air like a confession. Here was the truth I had been avoiding for months. Trevor wasn't just between jobs. He was financially irresponsible and completely dependent on me for everything. The podcast equipment he mentioned had cost over $800 and had been sitting unused in his apartment ever since. "That sounds like a personal problem," I said, adjusting my purse strap on my shoulder. "I'm sure 2 resourceful men like yourselves can figure something out. After all, according to you, what I do for work is so easy that anyone could do it. Maybe you should try calling your boss and asking for an advance on your salary." "Oh wait, you don't have a boss or a salary." Connor's eyes darted between Trevor and me, clearly calculating the cost of the meal and realizing he was about to be stuck with a bill he couldn't afford either. "Look, this got out of hand. Can't we just talk about this like adults?" "We are talking about it like adults," I replied. "Adults take responsibility for their choices and their words. Tonight, you both chose to spend 2 hours insulting me and dismissing my accomplishments. Now you get to choose how you're going to pay for the meal you ordered." The restaurant seemed to grow quieter around us, though I wasn't sure if it was real or just my heightened awareness of the moment. Other diners were definitely watching our table now, drawn by the obvious tension and raised voices. I could see a well-dressed couple at the table next to us exchange glances, and an older woman by the window had stopped eating entirely to observe our drama. "Brittany, please," Trevor said, his voice dropping to what he probably thought was a persuasive whisper. "You're embarrassing me. People are staring." "I'm embarrassing you?" I asked, letting my voice carry just enough that our neighbors could hear. "You spent the last 2 hours trying to humiliate me in front of your friend and anyone else within earshot. You told me my job was worthless, that I was acting above my station, and that I couldn't take a joke. But now I'm the one causing embarrassment?" Trevor's jaw clenched as he realized his attempt at manipulation had backfired. "You're making a scene over nothing. We were having a conversation. Maybe it got a little heated, but this is completely over the top." "A conversation?" I repeated, my voice rising slightly. "Is that what you call spending an entire evening tearing down your girlfriend's achievements? Because where I come from, we call that something else entirely." Connor finally found his voice, though he sounded significantly less confident than he had earlier. "Look, maybe we were a little harsh. Guys give each other crap all the time, and sometimes we forget that women are more sensitive about these things." The condescension in his words was breathtaking. Even now, faced with the consequences of their behavior, he was doubling down on the idea that I was the problem for being too sensitive, rather than acknowledging that they had been cruel and disrespectful. "More sensitive?" I asked, turning my full attention to Connor. "Or maybe women just have higher standards for how they expect to be treated by people who claim to care about them." The waiter returned, clearly uncomfortable with the situation, but needing to address the practical matter at hand. "Excuse me, but will you be staying for dessert? And should I bring the check now?" "Yes, please bring the check," I said before Trevor could answer. "These gentlemen are ready to settle up." Trevor's face had gone from pale to red, a flush of anger and panic that made him look younger and more desperate than I had ever seen him. "You can't do this. It's not fair. I invited you out to celebrate your promotion, and this is how you repay me." The revisionist history was almost laughable. "You invited me out?" "Trevor, I made the reservation. I suggested the restaurant. I was excited to share my good news with you, and you decided to use the opportunity to tear me down instead of building me up. The fact that you can't see the difference between those two things tells me everything I need to know about our relationship." I could feel the eyes of the restaurant staff on us now. Our server was hovering nearby with the check, clearly waiting for the right moment to approach. The hostess had moved closer to our section, probably preparing to intervene if the situation escalated further. "This is insane," Trevor muttered, running his hands through his hair. "You're destroying 2 years of our relationship over one dinner." "No," I said quietly. "You destroyed our relationship over one dinner. I'm just refusing to pretend it didn't happen." The check arrived with impeccable timing, as if the waiter had been waiting for a break in our conversation. He placed the black leather folder discreetly on the table between Trevor and Connor, then stepped back with the practiced grace of someone who had witnessed many uncomfortable dining situations. Trevor stared at the folder as if it contained a bomb. His hands remained frozen on the table, making no move to reach for it. Connor glanced between the check and Trevor, clearly hoping his friend would take charge of the situation. But Trevor seemed paralyzed by the reality of what was happening. $567, Connor read aloud after finally opening the folder, his voice barely above a whisper. Plus tip. The number hung in the air like a verdict. I knew exactly how much money Trevor had in his checking account, because he had complained about it just last week when his rent was due. It was less than $200. Connor wasn't much better off. He worked part-time at a sporting goods store and still lived with his parents at 29. "Well," I said cheerfully, "I'm sure you'll figure something out. Maybe you can wash dishes. I hear restaurants sometimes offer that as an alternative payment method." Trevor's head snapped up, his eyes wide with something between rage and desperation. "You wouldn't actually leave us here like this." "Not really. This is just you making a point, right? You're going to come back and pay after you've had your moment." The hope in his voice was almost pathetic. He still couldn't believe that his actions had real consequences, that his words had pushed me past the point of no return. Even now he expected me to be the responsible one, to clean up his mess and pretend everything was fine. "Oh, I'm definitely leaving," I assured him. "The only question is whether you call your parents for help, figure out a payment plan with the restaurant manager, or start looking for those rubber gloves in the kitchen." I started walking toward the exit, feeling lighter with each step. Behind me, I could hear Trevor calling my name, his voice getting more desperate and angry. Other diners were definitely staring now, some with disapproval, and others with barely concealed amusement at the drama unfolding before them. "Brittany!" Trevor shouted, loud enough that conversations throughout the restaurant paused. "You can't just walk away from this. From us." I stopped at the hostess station and turned back one final time. Trevor was half standing, his chair pushed back, his face flushed with embarrassment and fury. Connor remained seated, staring at the check as if willing the numbers to change. "Actually," I called back, my voice carrying clearly across the dining room, "I can walk away from this. I can walk away from someone who sees my success as a threat instead of a celebration. I can walk away from someone who thinks it's funny to humiliate me in public. And I can definitely walk away from someone who expects me to fund his lifestyle while he contributes nothing but criticism and complaints." The hostess gave me a subtle nod of approval as I headed for the door. "Have a wonderful evening," she said quietly, and I could hear the sincere support in her voice. "I intend to," I replied, stepping out into the cool Charlotte evening air. As the restaurant door closed behind me, I could hear raised voices from inside, but I didn't look back. For the first time in months, I felt completely free. The walk to my car felt like floating. Each step carried me further away from 2 years of making excuses for Trevor's behavior, of minimizing his failures and supporting his dreams while he undermined mine. The cool October air in Charlotte felt refreshing against my skin, washing away the stuffiness of the restaurant and the toxic atmosphere Trevor and Connor had created. I pulled out my phone as I reached my car and saw 3 missed calls from Trevor already. Then, as I watched, Connor's name appeared on my screen. I let it go to voicemail, then immediately blocked both of their numbers. Whatever desperate pleas or angry accusations they wanted to hurl at me could stay trapped in that restaurant with them. The drive home took me through the heart of Charlotte's financial district, past the gleaming towers where I had interviewed for my promotion just 3 weeks ago, the same buildings that Trevor had dismissed as corporate nonsense when I excitedly told him about the opportunity. Looking at them now, I felt a surge of pride that no one could take away from me. My apartment felt like a sanctuary when I walked through the door. I kicked off my heels, poured myself a glass of wine from a bottle I had been saving for a special occasion, and settled onto my couch with my laptop. If Trevor thought my work was so trivial, he was about to learn exactly how valuable my professional skills really were. I opened my social media accounts and began crafting posts about the evening's events. Not angry rants or emotional outbursts, but carefully worded professional observations about recognizing your worth and refusing to accept disrespect. Within minutes, colleagues and friends were responding with support and their own stories of similar experiences, My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Trevor had borrowed someone else's phone to message me. "You're going to regret this. Nobody will want to date someone who abandons people over a dinner bill." I screenshotted the message and added it to my post with the caption, "And here's the follow-up harassment when someone doesn't get their way." The next morning brought a flood of messages from friends, colleagues, and even distant acquaintances who had seen my social media posts. The response was overwhelming and universally supportive. Women shared their own stories of partners who had tried to diminish their accomplishments, and men offered perspectives on what healthy relationships actually looked like. My friend Jessica called me during my lunch break at work. "Girl, I have been waiting 2 years for you to see what the rest of us saw about Trevor. He was bleeding you dry financially and emotionally." "I can't believe I stayed that long," I admitted, though I felt relief rather than regret. "You loved him, and you wanted to believe he could change. That makes you human, not stupid." Around 3 p.m., my coworker David stopped by my desk with news. "You're not going to believe this, but Connor works at that sporting goods store in my neighborhood. I went by there today, and apparently he had to call in sick because he and some friends spent 4 hours washing dishes at a fancy restaurant last night to pay off a bill." I couldn't help but laugh. 4 hours? The bill was only about $600 with tip. Apparently they're not very efficient dishwashers. My friend who works there said they look like they'd never seen the inside of a kitchen before. That evening, I received a friend request on social media from the hostess at Castellanos. Her message was brief but meaningful. "I've been working in restaurants for 8 years, and what you did last night was the most epic response to terrible behavior I've ever witnessed. You're my hero." The validation from a complete stranger meant more than I expected. She had seen everything unfold and recognized that I had stood up for myself, rather than causing unnecessary drama. Trevor's desperate attempts to contact me continued throughout the week, but each blocked number and deleted voicemail only reinforced that I had made the right choice. His entitlement knew no bounds, but fortunately, my tolerance for it had finally reached its limit. Trevor and Connor faced immediate and lasting consequences for their behavior that night. Trevor had to borrow money from his disapproving parents to cover his share of the restaurant bill, leading to a humiliating conversation about his financial irresponsibility and dependence on others. When word spread through their social circle about what had happened, several mutual friends distanced themselves from Trevor, recognizing the pattern of disrespect and entitlement they had previously overlooked. Connor lost his part-time job at the sporting goods store after calling in sick without proper notice, and his reputation in our shared social network was permanently damaged. Both men found themselves facing the reality that their attitudes towards successful women had cost them relationships and respect in their community. Trevor's attempts to paint me as unstable or vindictive fell flat when people learned the full story of his behavior that evening. As I settled into my new role as senior marketing coordinator, managing my expanded team and developing strategies for major clients, I realized that walking away from Trevor had been about more than just one disastrous dinner. It had been about finally valuing myself enough to demand the respect I deserved, both personally and professionally. Looking back on that night, I felt grateful for Trevor's suggestion that I should leave. It had been the best advice he ever gave me, even if he hadn't meant it that way.